Hi, I'm Larry Magid, and I'm co-director of ConnectSafely.org along with Ann Collier. You have the written testimony that Ann produced for you. I'm just going to give a brief introduction to try to set some tones. First of all, I want to thank the New York Council for the invitation. I'm sorry that we couldn't be there on short notice, but it's a very busy week, and this is the best we can do. One of the things that we'd like to get across is that the net doesn't radically change the equation when it comes to children's safety. For example, cyberbullying. Is that new? Well, the cyber part is new, but bullying's been around for a long time. And whether it happens on the playground or online, it's still hurtful. In some ways, we wonder whether we even need the term cyberbullying. After all, if somebody pokes someone with a pencil, we don't call that pencil bullying. Nevertheless, as I'll talk about in a minute, there are some variables. The same is true with some of the psychological issues. A lot has been said about Facebook depression, and indeed, if you get bad news on Facebook or if somebody's rude to you or mean to you on Facebook, it can be depressing. But that's because the news is bad or somebody's being mean. The same would be true if they treated you that way on the playground. So we need to understand that it's behavior that we need to look at, not the technology. The technologies are neutral. The net can make things better, it can keep things the same, or it can make them worse. But it's how people behave and how children behave and how we treat children that makes a difference. Having said that, there's no question that the net does change the equation to some extent. Dana Boyd, who's a Microsoft researcher, recently got her PhD from Berkeley, and as part of her doctoral dissertation, she created a framework which shows how the net can affect things. At Connect Safely, we call it the net effect, but we're indebted to Dana for having come up with most of the framework. One is the idea of persistence and searchability. Anything that's online can stay there forever and be found via search engines and other tools. Also, it can be copied and pasted from anywhere to anywhere. It can be scalable. There's a very high potential visibility. The audiences can be invisible, and there's this blurring of public and private. To that, we've added disinhibition, which is a concept that when you feel removed from someone, you can often treat them in ways that you might not treat them in person. I walk around New York City quite a bit when I visit it, and once in a while I've bumped into people or people have bumped into me, and generally speaking, you say excuse me and you go on your way. But if you're driving down the highways in Los Angeles and somebody's rude to you or cuts you off, there's this tendency to give certain hand gestures or maybe screaming, and that's because you're surrounded by 3,000 pounds of steel, and you somehow think that that person in the other car isn't really a person. Of course, you know they are, but emotionally, you treat them differently than you would if you bumped into them on the streets of New York. Well, the same can be true online. That monitor between you and them tends to disinhibit some of your behavior. So we need to teach children that when they're online, they're in a world where people are going to have feelings. And just because there is a screen between you and the other person doesn't mean that you can't affect that person. When we talk about digital citizenship, we're not just saying that because we think it's a nice thing, but because it's protective. Research has shown that children who act aggressively actually increase their risk of being victimized. So how you behave affects how you're treated, or what goes around comes around. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. There's a lot more in our written testimony, so I do encourage you to read it. Thanks again.